All right, in this lecture, we're going to talk about child abuse. This is the last lecture of the semester, and I think it's really important that all members of the community know about types of child abuse, signs and symptoms of child abuse, reporting child abuse if you need to, and then what happens after a report is made. So it's our moral imperative, I think, as a society to protect the most vulnerable members. And for us, that's children who might be engaged in, who might have child abuse in their home environments. So professionals who work with children, elementary school teachers, nurses, doctors, firefighters, police officers are mandated reporters. They have to, if they see something, they are legally obligated to report child abuse to Child Protective Services, which is also known as CPS. I do also think that community members, so people who maybe don't legally have to, know about child abuse so that they can protect children by learning about the signs and symptoms of child abuse and then reporting it to Child Protective Services or CPS. So what about types of child abuse? We have physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect. Most of the child abuse cases are neglect, about 66%. About 17% are physical abuse. 10% of children are of the allegations that are made of child abuse are sexual abuse, and then 7% are emotional abuse. What should you do? What are the signs and symptoms of physical abuse? An unexplained injury. So a lot of times infant toddlers, preschoolers, even middle childhood fall on their hands, they fall on their shins, their knees, their butt, their elbows. The bruises along those places are really, really common. Maybe on your stomach, under your arms, your neck, your chest. Those are issues and those are places that are a little bit harder to injure. So an injury that's in an unusual place, or if it's unexplained, like, oh, I don't know, or I fell. Or you ask them one day I fell, and then the other day, oh, I ran into a door. So if the story about the injury is changing, or if it seems implausible or kind of unusual, that might be an example of physical abuse. If the child doesn't want to seek medical treatment, or the parent doesn't want to seek medical treatment for bruises, bumps, possible broken bones. So if the parent is resisting taking them in, because it's really common for doctors, like if somebody had hit their child, broken their child's leg, doctors can often figure that out by the way the bone breaks or where the bruise is. So doctors are really well versed in figuring that out. So parents sometimes would not want to take them in for medical treatment, knowing that the doctor might figure it out that they have abused their child. It's important that we see, when we see the signs of physical abuse, that we ask the child what happened, but we don't want to ask them leading questions. So remember, they're little children, and it's very easy to put thoughts and ideas into their own head. So we want to ask really open-ended questions where they can tell us what happened. And then once we've established, okay, this is abuse, or I don't like where this is headed, then making the call. So then CPS can send somebody else who's been trained in how to talk to children. So CPS members and people who work for CPS have spent years, and they have master's degree in this, learning how to talk to children and learning how to help children in abuse situations. So the biggest thing is if you have a suspicion of child abuse, that you just go ahead and you call and you get those professionals who know a lot more about child abuse involved in this. You're just identifying that you have a suspicion of child abuse. Emotional abuse, what are the signs and symptoms? Name calling, public shaming, belittling, ridiculing, scapegoating, and that kind of means if you signal one child out for more worse treatment than another one, being always sarcastic and snide with them, hostile looks, giving them the silent treatment, never talking to them, lying, refusing to talk to them, angrily attacking them verbally whenever they talk, humiliating them, insulting them. Any kind of chronic use of these types of things can be a sign of emotional abuse. Unfortunately, parents are sarcastic sometimes. Sometimes we tease. That's not emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is chronically using these with the intent to belittle them, to make them feel worse about themselves, to be unkind, to be cruel, to bully. That's kind of what encompasses emotional abuse. Unfortunately, emotional abuse is the least reported because it's really difficult to identify. You could do this purely at home. The child would never have any outward sign on their body. They'd never have bruises or bumps. They might act out, they might have emotional issues regarding this, but if they're not telling you that they're being emotionally abused, you're probably not going to know it. Also, it can be really hard to like prosecute as well. So if you think a child's being emotionally abused and you report it, the parent could say, no, I never say that kind of stuff. He's lying. And we don't have any proof otherwise. And so it can be really hard for those people to be identified as abusers. So that's one of the really difficult things about emotional abuse. Typically, emotional abuse is in conjunction with physical abuse, which will have physical signs and symptoms, sexual abuse, which will also have signs and symptoms, bullying, or family violence, domestic violence as well. So what are signs and symptoms of sexual abuse in children? A change in sleeping patterns such as nightmares, night terrors, frequent wake-ups, peeing in the bed, or having accidents in bed at a much older age, like 7 and 8 year olds. That might be a example of sexual abuse. Drastic changes in eating patterns, either eating a lot to excess and beyond, or eating much, much less. Both ways to change your body type to maybe become, either way, to become less desirable to the person who is sexually abusing you. Sudden and very drastic mood swings between elation, joy, all the way to like frustration, anger, sadness, just terror, that type of stuff. So sudden mood swings between the two. The biggest thing is dropping hints about abuse through play, writing, drawing, or speaking. So if the child seems to have an adult knowledge of sexual behaviors, so if a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old knows about specific sex acts that you wouldn't expect a 3-year-old to know about, and then they tell you about it, they draw about it, they speak about it, or they play, like in the dramatic play area, the pretend play where there's a little kitchen, if they are talking about sex acts to peers, that's a really big indicator that the child might have sexual abuse or incest. If they have that adult knowledge of behaviors and they're telling you through play that it's happening. If they also develop a certain fear of a person or a place, they don't want to go to Chuck E. Cheese, they don't want to go to their uncle's house, or they become very fearful of an adult in their life, that might be an example that some kind of abuse is happening as well. If they receive really extravagant gifts or money or toys from an older adult for no reason, like if not like, hey, grandma gave me a PlayStation, but like my second cousin twice removed who I just spent the weekend with, gave me a really extravagant toy, told me not to tell anybody about it, and I'm also showing mood swings and changes in my eating behavior, that might be an indicator to us that something happened at that person's house. Sudden repulsion with their body or who they are, they don't want to take care of themselves, their eating pattern really changes, they don't like to look at themselves, they're wearing huge baggy clothes, that type of stuff. Or talking about an older friend or somebody like that and refusing to tell us more about it, or how she knows this person or what she does with this person, but just that she has this new older friend, then that might be an indicator as well of sexual abuse. So sexual abuse can also include rape, incest, sodomy, lewd and lascivious acts upon a child either older than 14 or under than 14, and then child molestation or incest as well. And that also includes, and this is what the sexual exploitation really refutes to, is kind of like the child pornography where you're taking pictures of children or other people are taking pictures of children and you're trading them over the internet. There was a huge FBI raid a couple of weeks ago about this. The FBI takes this very seriously. They're trying to stop the online sale and trading of sexual pictures of children online, because that's a huge issue. There's a whole black market, and I guess on the dark web and things like that, people are being really disgusting and selling and trading these pictures of children and then children as well in a sex trafficking way as well. And so the FBI has gotten really involved and they're trying to crack down on that, which is fantastic. So term sexual abuse. So this is once more about like the sexual exploitation, but then sex trafficking, especially in San Diego, we're on a border. The border between any countries in the world is going to have trafficking of humans, drugs, and then kind of anything like that. And so part of that is human trafficking and sex trafficking, either of images or of children and adults being sex trafficked over borders. And so I know for a fact that this happens in San Diego and TJ, and then any borders around the world as well. Like I've heard of ones in Eastern New York. Like I guess there's more rural border crossings in like New England between Canada and the United States. And so there was some sex trafficking and then pornography being traded across borders, and they did a raid a couple of years ago on that as well. So any kind of border like that, you're going to have this. And so we live on a border region, and so I want people to be aware of the fact that sex trafficking is happening all around us. Women and children and even men are being sex trafficked across our borders. And so knowing that this is happening and the knowledge of it will help us. If we see something happen in our urban areas, then we can, or even our rural areas, we can, you know, make the call to the police or child protective services if something isn't sitting right with us. Then neglect. Neglect is the biggest reason that we get, that child protective services gets calls. Generally what it is the failure or inability for the parent to adequately supervise or protect their child. And we have two kinds. We have passive and we have active down here. So passive is that the parent or guardian, because of another issue, cannot provide regular care for their child. If a parent is struggling with substance abuse, they're in a domestic violence situation, the parent has a developmental disability, cognitive disability of their own, or they have a mental illness that's interfering with their ability to take care of children. And this is most reasons why we get neglect calls. Active is that you have the ability, cognitively, financially, emotionally, you have the ability to give a child regular care, but you choose not to. And that's much more rare. Typically, it's passive. The reasons and the things that we are going to look for with neglect would be being frequently absent from school, not having enough food to eat at school, or money to buy food, and you're stealing it from other kids' lunch boxes, you're stealing it from the cafeteria, or you're begging off of your friends. Not having medical care or dental care, teeth rotted, not ever going for checkups, not having immunizations, not having glasses if you can't see far away, not having hearing aids if you can't hear, or just going to the regular checkups to make sure that you're growing healthy and strong. They're consistently dirty, their clothes aren't washed, or sometimes children will wash their own clothes and they don't ever really get dry, and so they kind of smell musty or dirty. They have severe body odor. The other day I was dropping my children off from school, and the little boy had perfectly combed hair, and then he had a dirty like polo shirt because my children's school has a dress code, and that was not neglect. That was like, oh my God, I forgot to do the dishes. Forgot to do the washing last night. Oh my God, just wear this. You know, he had a shower, his teeth were brushed, his hair was clean, and then he was wearing a dirty shirt. Like, oh my God, I totally forgot to put the wash in the dryer last night, and now it's 5 minutes before school. So not always being dirty will mean that you have neglect, but it can be a sign or symptom. Lacking sufficient clothing consistently for the weather. So you forgot your hoodie one day, but if it's under 50 degrees and you never have a hoodie or a coat, then that means that somebody's not providing a coat for this child. Abusing alcohol or other drugs because it's in your home and you have access to it from a young age. And then sometimes asking children if they're walking home on their own when they're under the age of 10, if they don't have anybody to greet them, or they're telling you that there's nobody to provide care after school, that might also be a sign of neglect. I do want to talk about spanking or corporal punishment. Right now, corporal punishment is allowed by law as a disciplinary action in the state. You can face legal trouble as a parent if you cross a line and become too forceful when administering the punishment to children. The law states that child abuse occurs when anybody willfully inflicts upon a child any cruel or inhumane corporal punishment or an injury resulting in a traumatic condition. So if you cause an injury to your child while spanking, a bruise, a welt, broken skin, or lacerations, you can be charged with and prosecuted for child abuse. So while corporal punishment or spanking is legal, if you injure your child while doing it, that can still be considered child abuse. You can be reported and you can be prosecuted for it, or you can go through the system for it. I would say that many of us were spanked, and maybe we are making the choice to spank. I know that I have spanked my children and I do regret it. It was times like, for example, one of my twins running away from me in the Target parking lot, being really upset and really scared and afraid that my child had run away in a parking lot and they could have been hit by a car. And I spanked her and I yelled about, you know, being safe and listening to mommy and holding my hand and stuff like that. I didn't have the emotional regulation in myself as an adult in order to handle that incredible fear that comes with your child almost being hurt. I'm now trying to do a better job of regulating myself, making sure that I have the techniques and the positive guidance to parent my children appropriately. So I'm trying not to spank, and I don't want them spanked by their grandparents otherwise as well. So making these positive changes in my life to help myself do the guidance that I want to and the regulation that I want to in order to not spank. So I would encourage people who are spanking to maybe think about ways that they can get some support from people around them in order to do a better job regulating, so that they don't feel the need to spank, and we can give a child consequences through boundaries or limits or things like that. All right, so what do you need to do if you want to report child abuse? When I was doing these when I was making these PowerPoints years ago, my sister-in-law was helping me with childcare. And so I said, oh, I got to go write a PowerPoint about child abuse, my favorite subject. Like, I was being all sarcastic because nobody wants to talk about this. This is a terrible subject. Nobody likes to learn about child abuse, but I think it's really important. So I'm typing, and then she comes in and she sits down and she's like, so, and I'm like, you think somebody's being abused? And she's like, yeah, I think it's the friend of one of my kids. So we talked about it, and I gave her some guidance. And so what I told her is that if you think and you have a suspicion that a child is being abused, you should report it. And what you should do, I would just say, call 411, or you can call this number over here, but typically call 411 and say, I think that somebody in my life is being abused. Could you link me up with Child Protective Services? And they will transfer you to the right person, or they will get you the phone number that you need. So just calling 411, I mean, if you want to take the bus to El Cajon, 411 can help you. 411 is a great resource for anybody about like any kind of support services that you need in the community. So I would just say, I have suspicions about a child being abused. Can you get me to the right person? And they should be able to help you with that. You are going to need a certain amount of information. You're going to need to know the child's name, the parent's name, a phone number for them, an address for them. So like if you just see a child getting spanked or hit in the Walmart parking lot, you're probably not going to be able to call and report because you don't know that child, you don't know the family. So you are going to need to have a certain amount of information. So in my sister-in-law's case, it was her oldest son's friend of a friend who was kind of saying things to her son about physical abuse, like getting hit with a belt repeatedly, being told that he was worthless and stupid. And I said, well, if you have the child's name or you have the child's address, then you can go ahead, or you can go to the elementary school and you can let the principal know about what you think is happening as well. That's not guaranteed that the principal is going to call for you, but they might have some more additional information about the child, and so that they can make the call as well. So there are ways that you can get involved even if you're not a mandated reporter, and the best thing to do is just call 411. So if you report in good faith, you are protected by the law. So if you call because you're really mad at somebody and you want them to get in trouble, or you're going through a really vicious divorce, or your neighbor called on you and you want to retaliate, you're not protected. You could be persecuted too, and they will. Trust me, the state is so serious about childcare. If you report because you're being mean or you're retaliating or you don't like somebody, they will prosecute you, and you will go through a court case. They want to protect teachers, they want to protect police officers, they want to protect educators who do have to report and might not have a lot of evidence, so that they keep this good faith really intact. So if you report and you do it in good faith, you really truly have a suspicion that a child is being abused, you cannot be prosecuted civilly or criminally. So the person who you report on, or the state, if you do it in good faith, cannot come after you legally in any case. You're not on the hook as an individual or within your group as well. Well, the law presumes that child abuse and neglect reports are made in good faith. So you really truly have this belief and this suspicion that a child is being abused. So that is what the law thinks. So if you report in retaliation or to knowingly hurt an individual or a school, then that can lead to fines or to prison time, and that has happened in California, because that's how important the good faith part of this law is, that they will prosecute you for doing it not in good faith. So what happens after you report? So there's a screening. So you need to have, in the screening, you need to have the name or an address or a phone number or something like that. The person on the end of the phone will decide, because of the screening, do we need to have an investigation or not? So if you're just saying, my sister spanked your kid because her sister smacked her baby sister, then they're going to say, well, spanking and corporal punishment if there was no injury is not child abuse, and they're not going to even open a case. Maybe there will be an investigation, like you are a mandated reporter, you're an elementary school aide, and you have a suspicion that there is child abuse going on in somebody's life. Then they'll say, okay, that requires an investigation. They'll have somebody come out. They will make another investigation. They'll talk to the child in the appropriate way. They'll be confidential. They won't ask leading questions. They've been trained to investigate. And from there, they'll either have the child removed, or the child will be placed in foster care, or the child will stay with the family, and the family will be offered services, financial services, parent services, substance abuse services, domestic violence services, whatever services the family need. They'll try to really support that family by giving them those services so that the abuse can stop and the child doesn't have to go through the trauma of being taken away from mom and dad. Sometimes, though, if it's immediate danger, we think that the child is being beaten and it's really dangerous for them to stay in the home, then the child will be removed and placed in foster care. And from there on, the family will somehow reunify as well. So we'll offer them those services. They'll get domestic violence if they need it, or substance abuse services if they need it. They'll get financial aid. They'll get parenting classes. But they have to do it within a certain amount of time. If they cannot do it with all that stuff, and kind of get their lives together within a certain amount of time, then we will then decide if the child stays in foster care and eventually goes for adoption, or if they'll return back to their home. So there is a really kind of set way that CPS screens, investigates, and then removes children. It's very set by the state. There's lots of lawyers and agents and social services agencies in this situation, so that we can make sure that children are removed from a abusive home, or they stay in a home and those families are offered services. What we want and why we have this system is to identify children who might be abused and make sure that the abuse stops, either in the home or outside the home. So other issues to consider is it's important to report and then remain confidential within your community and your social circle as well. So if you called on a neighbor or a friend or something like that, the best thing you can do is just allow Child Protective Services to handle it. Don't go out and say, oh, I called on her, or she's a really crappy mom, or talk about that, because that's not as much drama as that would be, and maybe as much fun as it would to be to gossip. At the end of the day, that's hurting the child. That's hurting the family, and it's hurting the child, and it might even prevent the family from getting services or taking advantage of the services that they're offered, and that people are talking about them and gossiping and saying all these terrible things about them. So if you do have to report on somebody you know, or even professionally, the best thing to do is just to stay confidential. So if you're a teacher, a nurse, or a police officer, you call, you let CPS handle it, and then you just let it be. You don't talk about it to your coworkers, you don't talk about it to the firefighters, you just allow Child Protective Services to take it from now. You have a suspicion, you identified and reported it, it's done. Let the professionals do it, and don't gossip. Don't investigate as well. So if you have a suspicion, just report it. Allow a trained official who has a master's degree and who has been trained for a long time in how to talk to children do their job. So all you have to do is have a suspicion and call CPS. In conclusion, as members of society, we must report child abuse to Child Protective Services when we have a suspicion of child abuse. It's really an important part of our role is to take vulnerable people, which is children, and if we have a suspicion of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect, that we call Child Protective Services in order for that child to get the help that they need. If you want any more information, there's a fantastic video called Shadow's Flight. It's 20 minutes long, it's on YouTube, and it's free, and it talks specifically about child abuse, and it talks specifically about issues within California, what the signs and symptoms are, and how you report as well. All right, that is it for this week. I will see you guys online.